The dying hours on Viridia Prime were marked by chaos and destruction. The skies above the once thriving agro-colony were choked with smoke, intermittent flashes of orbital fire, and the desperate ascent of evacuation shuttles. The Xylos Collective had overrun the planet with terrifying efficiency, their insectoid reptilian forms swarming through human settlements with biological weaponry that left little in its wake but ash and ruin. Sergeant Marcus Mark Rylan crouched behind the remnants of a colonial administration building, his armor scorched and dented from 3 days of continuous fighting. He signaled to the remaining 5 members of Rhino Squad, all that remained of the 12 Marines he'd led planetside a week ago. LZ Omega reports 15 minutes until final lift. He rasped into his squad comm, his voice hoarse from shouting over gunfire and the caustic smoke that permeated everything. We hold this line until the civilian transports are away. Then we fall back in sequence. Corporal Eva Rostova took position at his right flank, her rifle methodically tracking the shifting shadows beyond their perimeter. "Copy that, Sergeant," she replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes. "Command reports the last civilian group is boarding now." Rylan nodded, scanning the burning landscape through his tactical visor. 7 years of war against the Xylos had taught him to read their movements, to anticipate the waves of chitinous warriors that moved with hive-like coordination. His squad had been running on stims and spite for the past 72 hours, covering the frantic evacuation of Viridia's remaining colonists. Another doomed world, another strategic retreat. "Incoming!" Private Hemsworth shouted from his position 20 meters to the left. The warning followed immediately by the distinctive high-pitched whine of Xylos bioprojectiles. "Cover!" Rylan ordered, dropping flat as gelatinous orbs arced overhead, bursting against buildings and terrain with caustic splashes. Rostova, suppressive fire on the eastern approach. Torres, Walsh, flank and clear. The familiar rhythm of combat narrowed Rylan's world to tactical inputs and response patterns. The Terran Coalition Marine Corps had forged him into a weapon, one that functioned best amid chaos. His Marines responded with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized by countless battles fought shoulder to shoulder. As the firefight intensified, the desperate transmissions from the landing zone crackled through his helmet comms. Panicked civilians, harried flight coordinators, and the grim damage reports from the orbital defense platforms failing above them. "Shuttle 7 is away," came the update from command. "Final shuttle prepping for launch. 10 minutes, Rhino Squad." Rylan gestured for his team to begin their phased withdrawal. "Fall back to position Delta. Cover patterns, people." They moved in practiced, leapfrog fashion, 2 Marines providing covering fire while the others retreated 20 meters, then switching roles. The choreography of combat had become second nature after so many desperate withdrawals on so many burning worlds. It was during one such movement, as Rylan paused behind the twisted wreckage of a colonial harvester to provide covering fire for Rostova's retreat, that he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the cacophony of battle. A high-pitched, trilling chitter. Distinctly Xylos, but wrong somehow. Not the guttural clicking of the warriors they'd been fighting, but something softer, higher, something distressed. Rylan froze, his attention split between providing cover fire and the strange sound emanating from a partially collapsed biostructure to his right, one of the strange, organic habitats the Xylos constructed rapidly upon taking territory. "Sergeant, we need to move," Rostova urged through the comm, her voice tense as she reached the fallback position. "Final shuttle reports, boarding complete. LZ Omega is initiating launch sequence." The sound came again, weaker this time. Something small and frightened. "Roger that," Rylan replied, his eyes fixed on the alien structure. "I'm picking up movement in that Xylos Hab cluster. Possible holdout. I'll sanitize it and join you at the LZ perimeter." Rostova's hesitation was audible in the static silence before she responded. "Protocol is clear, Sergeant. We move now. No time for cleanup operations. Take the squad to the LZ. Establish perimeter and provide cover fire for my approach. I'll be right behind you." Rylan kept his voice firm, brooking no argument. "Copy that," Rostova replied, her tone making it clear she didn't agree but wouldn't challenge his authority in the field. "5 minutes, Sergeant. Then that shuttle lifts with or without us." Rylan waited until his squad had withdrawn before approaching the damaged structure. Every instinct honed by years of warfare told him to ignore the sound, to follow protocol and fall back. The last human shuttle on a dying world wasn't going to wait for a Marine with a sudden crisis of conscience. Yet something deeper than training pushed him forward. The interior of the Xylo structure was alien and unsettling. Bioluminescent fungi provided dim, pulsing light across surfaces that seemed to flex and breathe. The architecture followed non-human logic, curves and spirals that disoriented human perception. The air was thick with the distinctive acrid sweet scent of Xylo's biochemistry. The sound led him deeper, growing more distinct. A rhythmic, distressed chirping. In a recessed chamber, partially collapsed from orbital bombardment, Rylan found the source. A lone Xylo's hatchling, no larger than his forearm, trapped beneath fallen debris. Near it lay 2 adult Xylos, clearly dead, their chitinous exoskeletons crushed. Unlike the warrior caste Rylan had fought countless times, these appeared to be non-combatants, their forms more slender, lacking the heavy armor plates and weapon appendages of the soldiers. The hatchling's soft, pale green chitin hadn't yet hardened into the black armor of maturity. Its large, multifaceted eyes fixed on Rylan, reflecting his armored form in dozens of tiny mirrors. Pure terror radiated from the small creature as it struggled weakly against the weight pinning it down. Rylan raised his rifle automatically, years of training asserting itself. The Xylos were the enemy. They had destroyed dozens of human colonies, killed millions. Standing orders regarding Xylo's encounters were absolute. Yet he hesitated, finger resting beside the trigger rather than on it. This wasn't a warrior. It was a child, a hatchling. Caught in a war it didn't choose, orphaned in the same wave of violence that had orphaned countless human children. "Sergeant status?" Rostova's voice cut through his hesitation. 3 minutes to launch. The Xylos are pressing the perimeter hard. The hatchling made another soft, clicking plea, its delicate limbs struggling futilely against the debris. In that moment, something broke in Marcus Rylan, or perhaps something long buried resurfaced. With a muttered curse that indicted the war, his commanding officers, and his own judgment, he slung his rifle and carefully lifted the debris pinning the hatchling. Free from the weight, the creature didn't flee or attack. It simply curled into itself, trembling, too weak or frightened to move. After a moment's hesitation, Rylan carefully wrapped it in a discarded thermal blanket from his pack, tried to mimic how he'd seen the non-combatant adults carrying their young during reconnaissance missions. "Sergeant," Rostova's voice was urgent now. "Shuttle engines are hot. Where are you?" "On my way," Rylan responded, quickly emptying his medkit pouch and gently placing the wrapped hatchling inside. He secured the pouch to his chest plate, feeling the slight weight and warmth against his armor. Structure clear. Moving to extraction. He sprinted back through burning streets, the sounds of battle intensifying around the landing zone. Orbital defense platforms were failing overhead, their destruction painting the smoke-filled sky with brief, sun-bright flares. Rhino Squad had established a defensive perimeter at the shuttle ramp, laying down suppressive fire against approaching Xylo's warriors. Rostova spotted him first, waving him forward with urgent gestures as the shuttle's engines rose from a whine to a roar. "Cutting it close, Sergeant," she shouted as he reached the ramp, her eyes narrowing at something, perhaps the unusual way he was favoring his chest or the absence of his medkit from its usual position. "Last man in," the shuttle loadmaster called, already triggering the ramp closure sequence as Rylan stumbled aboard. The crowded shuttle interior was thick with the smell of fear, smoke, and too many unwashed bodies. Colonial civilians packed the center rows, their faces hollow with shock and loss. Marines and colonial security forces occupied jump seats along the walls, weapons still clutched in white-knuckled grips. Rylan found an empty space near the rear bulkhead, away from his squad, and strapped in just as the shuttle lurched upward with combat speed acceleration. The hatchling in his pouch stirred slightly against his chest, but made no sound audible over the roar of engines and the groaning of the shuttle's frame as it punched through the burning atmosphere. Through a small viewport, Rylan watched Viridia Prime fall away beneath them, another human world abandoned to the Xylos. Another defeat in a war with no end in sight. The weight against his chest felt impossibly heavy, laden with implications he couldn't yet fully comprehend. He had left more than protocol behind on that burning world. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. The troop transport Vindicator was a hive of controlled chaos as it processed a flood of refugees and military personnel evacuated from Viridia Prime. Its cavernous hangar bays and corridors were crowded with dazed civilians awaiting processing and reassignment to various sectors of human-controlled space. Ryland's Rhino squad had been billeted in a cramped barracks module in the ship's aft section, temporary quarters shared with 3 other Marine squads similarly extracted from the planet's surface. The close quarters made Ryland's secret almost impossible to maintain. For 3 ship cycles, he had managed through careful maneuvering. He kept to his assigned bunk when possible, volunteered for solitary duties like equipment maintenance, and found reasons to use the sanitation facilities during low-traffic periods. During mandatory squad briefings and debriefs, he kept the medkit pouch secured against his chest, claiming a shrapnel wound that needed continuous nanogel treatment. Caring for what he'd begun mentally calling Chit presented challenges he'd never anticipated. The young Xylos required sustenance, and Rylan had no idea what constituted appropriate nutrition for a hatchling. Through trial and error, he discovered it would consume small amounts of protein-rich nutrient paste, standard marine rations, mixed with water. He administered these makeshift meals during his wound treatment sessions, always behind locked doors. Chit remained remarkably quiet, as if sensing the need for secrecy. The hatchling seemed to be studying Rylan, its compound eyes tracking his movements with alien intelligence. Occasionally, it would mimic his gestures in miniature, or attempt to reproduce the sounds of his voice with its clicking mandibles. "You understand this is insane, right?" Rylan whispered to the creature as he carefully cleaned its soft chitin with a sterile wipe. "The moment anyone sees you, we're both finished." Chit reached out with delicate, multi-jointed fingers to touch Rylan's much larger hand, making a soft trilling sound that Rylan had come to associate with contentment or curiosity. "Yeah, I know," he sighed. "I'm not even sure why I did it. Moment of weakness. Combat fatigue, maybe. The brass would have me psych-evaluated and discharged, which was the best-case scenario. Court-martial and imprisonment was more likely, especially given the current political climate and the increasingly desperate nature of the war. The Vindicator was scheduled to reach Sector Command in 4 more ship cycles. Rylan knew he couldn't maintain the deception indefinitely. Already, he noticed Corporal Rostova watching him with increasing suspicion, her keen eyes noting his irregular movements and the strange requisitions from the mess hall. Extra nutrient paste, water rations, sterile wipes. On the 5th day of transit, Rylan's fragile arrangement collapsed. He had just returned from a mandatory tactical review, during which Captain Harlow had announced that all personnel would undergo complete medical screening due to concerns about Xylo's bioweapon exposure on Viridia Prime. The screenings would begin immediately by squad assignment. "Rylan," Rostova called, intercepting him in the narrow corridor leading to their barracks. "Medical screening starts in 30 minutes. Rhino Squad is in the first rotation." "I'll be there," Rylan replied, trying to keep his voice neutral despite the cold dread spreading through his chest. A medical scan would immediately detect Chit's presence. "Just need to grab my service record chip from my locker." Rostova's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'll wait. We can walk together." Before he could formulate a plausible objection, the ship's alarm system activated with a shrill, pulsing tone. "Attention all personnel," came the automated announcement. "Initiating Level 2 bioscan protocols. Possible contaminant detected in Sector 4. All personnel, Remain in place for individual scanning. Rylan froze, his hand instinctively moving to cover the pouch against his chest. Bioscan protocols meant mobile scanning units would sweep every compartment, checking for unauthorized biological signatures. What the hell? Rostova frowned, glancing at the pulsing amber lights now illuminating the corridor. We haven't had a level 2 alert since. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixing on Ryland's protective gesture toward his chest. Something clicked into place behind her eyes. All the odd behaviors, the secretiveness, the unusual requisitions. "Sergeant," she said slowly, her hand drifting toward her sidearm. "What's in the medkit?" Ryland weighed his options rapidly. Rostova was by the book, but she wasn't heartless. She was also his most trusted squad mate, the only one who might possibly understand. "Not here," he said quietly. "Barracks module. I'll explain." Rostova hesitated, then nodded once, sharply. "If this is what I think it is, Ryland, you've lost your mind." In the relative privacy of the nearly empty barracks, most of the squad was elsewhere when the alert sounded. Ryland carefully unsealed the medkit pouch and revealed Chit. The hatchling had grown slightly during the days aboard the Vindicator, its chitin beginning to darken in patches, but it was still unmistakably a juvenile Xylos. Rostova's reaction was immediate and visceral. She drew her sidearm, training it not on the hatchling, but on Ryland. "Have you completely lost your mind? That's a Xylos. You brought an enemy organism aboard a military vessel during a war." "It's a child," Ryland said quietly, sheltering Chit with his body. "Un non combatant. Its parents are dead. It was trapped. It's a breach of at least 7 articles of war." Rostova hissed, though she kept her voice low enough not to carry beyond the barracks. "It could be carrying bioweapons, transmitting our position, anything. The Xylos don't think like us, Ryland. They're hive-minded. Even their young are part of their war machine." "Look at it," Ryland urged. "Does it look like a weapon to you?" Chit had curled into a defensive posture against Ryland's chest, its large eyes fixed on Rostova's weapon, small limbs trembling. Before Rostova could respond, the barracks door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Commander Valerius stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security officers. The ship's intelligence officer was a tall, gaunt man with cold eyes and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. "Corporal Rostova," he said smoothly. "The Bioscan detected an anomalous signature in this compartment. But I see you've already found it." His eyes fixed on Chit with an expression of clinical interest rather than surprise. "Sir," Rostova began, lowering her weapon, "I was just discovering this myself. Sergeant Ryland apparently recovered this specimen on Viridia Prime." Indeed, Valerius stepped into the compartment, the security officers remaining at the door. A fascinating breach of protocol. The Xylos hatchling gives off a distinctive biosignature. Quite unique, actually. Not one we've cataloged before. The way he said it sent a chill down Ryland's spine. There was too much knowledge in that statement, too little shock. "Sir, I take full responsibility," Ryland said, standing slowly, still cradling Chit. "My squad had no knowledge of this. I acted alone, against orders." "Oh, I'm quite certain of that, Sergeant Ryland," Valerius replied with a thin smile. "You'll be escorted to the brig, pending formal charges. The specimen will be transferred to xenobiology for analysis." The clinical way he said analysis made Ryland's jaw tighten. He'd heard rumors about Valerius's specimens before, stories of live dissection, experimental procedures, data extraction by any means necessary. "The hatchling is a non-combatant," Ryland insisted. "Under the Frontier Accords, even enemy civilians are afforded basic protections." Valerius's smile widened fractionally. "The Frontier Accords apply to recognize sentient species, Sergeant. The Coalition has never formally acknowledged the Xylos as such. They're classified as a hostile invasive organism. Legally, you're merely transporting an invasive beetle." He nodded to the security officers. "Take him. Secure the specimen separately." "Sir," Rostova interjected unexpectedly. "As the discovering officer, I would request to accompany the specimen to ensure proper chain of evidence for the court-martial proceedings." Valerius regarded her with cold assessment before nodding. Very well, Corporal. Proper procedures should be observed. You may escort the specimen to Xenobiology Lab 3. I'll meet you there shortly. As the security officers moved to flank Rylan, one reaching for Chit, the ship's alarm system abruptly shifted from amber to red, the tone changing to a harsh, insistent blare. "Attention all personnel," came the automated announcement. "Solar flare detected. Radiation shields activating. All personnel secure stations for radiation protocol." In the momentary distraction, as the security officers checked their comms for protocol confirmation, Rylan made his decision. With a swift movement, he drove his elbow into the solar plexus of the nearest officer, simultaneously sweeping the legs of the second. Before either could recover, he had bolted for the door, Chit clutched protectively against his chest. "Rylan!" Rostova shouted behind him, but he didn't stop to see if she was pursuing. The radiation alert had sent the ship into controlled chaos. Personnel moving quickly to designated shelter areas, radiation shields deploying with mechanical thuds throughout the corridors. Rylan used the confusion to his advantage, moving against the flow of traffic, heading toward the secondary hangar bay where smaller craft were stored. His mind raced as he ran. The Vindicator was a massive vessel, but there were limited routes to the hangars, all of which would be monitored. Yet Valerius's reaction had confirmed his fears. Whatever awaited Chit in xenobiology would be a death sentence, likely a painful one. There was no turning back now. As he rounded a corner into a less crowded maintenance corridor, Rylan nearly collided with a ship's medic, a young woman he recognized vaguely from Rhino Squad's initial processing upon boarding. "Sergeant Rylan," she said, startled. "You should be heading to a radiation shelter." "This section isn't." Her eyes widened as she noticed Chit, who had poked its head from the pouch, chittering softly in distress at the jarring movements. "Please," Rylan said, not bothering to hide the desperation in his voice. "I can explain, but not now. I need to reach Auxiliary Hangar 3. The medic, her name tag Red Park, stared at Chit for a long moment, then at Rylan's face. Something in her expression shifted. "The radiation alert is a drill," she said quietly. "But they've locked down all hangar access. They're looking for you, in that." She nodded toward Chit. "There's talk of bioweapons, extreme danger. Valerius has dispatched security teams to all exit points." Rylan's heart sank. "I need to get off this ship. Valerius wants the hatchling for experimentation. It's just a child." Medic Park hesitated, then made a decision. "Maintenance shaft 4J bypasses the main security checkpoints. It'll take you near Auxiliary Hangar 3. The emergency override for the hangar doors is Tango 16 Foxtrot 9. Why are you helping me?" Rylan asked, stunned by the unexpected assistance. "I processed tissue samples from Valerius's last specimen," she replied, a shadow crossing her face. "Just go. The shaft entrance is 2 junctions down, behind the environmental control panel." Rylan nodded his thanks and continued his desperate flight through the ship's service corridors and maintenance shafts, guided by Medic Park's directions. Security alerts echoed through the ship, describing him as armed and dangerous, potentially contaminated with Xylo's bioweapons. When he finally reached Auxiliary Hangar 3, alarms were blaring throughout the section. Through the small viewport in the access door, he could see the hangar was minimally staffed, most personnel having responded to the radiation alert. A single scout ship sat prepped on the launch pad, its pre-flight checklist likely interrupted by the alarms. Using the emergency override code, Rylan gained access to the hangar. The few technicians present turned in surprise as he burst through the door. "Security breach in Auxiliary Hangar 3, announced the ship's AI. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures." Rylan sprinted for the scout ship, ignoring the shouts of the technicians. Behind him, he heard the hangar doors begin to seal as the lockdown protocol activated. It would be close. He reached the scout ship just as the first security team entered the hangar from the main access point, weapons drawn. Without hesitation, he slammed the entry hatch closed behind him and launched into the emergency startup sequence. a protocol all Marines were trained in for extreme extraction scenarios. The scout ship's engines flared to life as security personnel surrounded the craft, Valerius himself appearing at the hangar entrance, his face contorted with rage. Ship-wide security alert, came the announcement as Ryland disengaged the docking clamps. Unauthorized launch in progress. All countermeasures authorized. The small craft lurched forward as Ryland pushed the throttle, accelerating toward the hangar's energy barrier, the only thing separating the pressurized environment from the vacuum of space. In standard operations, the barrier would disengage when authorized launch protocols were followed. In a lockdown, the barrier remained intact, impenetrable to most vessels. But the scout ship was designed for emergency extractions under combat conditions. Its reinforced hull could withstand the momentary energy surge of pushing through a friendly barrier. Painful for the ship's systems and potentially damaging, but possible. Ryland braced himself as the craft slammed into the energy barrier, alarms blaring throughout the cockpit. For a terrifying moment, the scout hung suspended in the crackling energy field, systems fluctuating wildly. Then, with a final surge of power, the ship broke through, tumbling into the void beyond. Behind him, the Vindicator loomed, its massive form already beginning to pivot, tracking systems locking onto the fleeing craft. Ryland had moments before the larger vessel's weapons would be brought to bear. As his hands flew over the controls, stabilizing the small ship and plotting an emergency jump course away from the Vindicator, Chit emerged from the medkit pouch. The hatchling observed the star's cape visible through the cockpit viewport with what appeared to be awe, its compound eyes reflecting the distant stars. Yeah, Ryland told it grimly as the jump drive spooled up. Welcome to life as a fugitive. The ship lurched into jump space just as the first warning shots from the Vindicator streaked past their position. The stars stretched into lines, then vanished as the small craft escaped into the swirling unreality between systems. Ryland had become a deserter, a traitor to the Terran coalition, and all for an alien child he couldn't even communicate with. The void between stars became Marcus Ryland's home in the weeks that followed. The scout ship, a TS-17 Jackrabbit, according to its transponder, was designed for short reconnaissance missions, not extended habitation. Its supplies were limited, its fuel cells efficient but finite. Ryland carefully rationed everything, knowing each decision might mean the difference between survival and a cold death in the emptiness. He navigated by instinct and necessity, keeping to the fringes of mapped space. He avoided established shipping lanes and coalition patrol routes, instead seeking the shelter of nebular clouds and dense asteroid fields where sensors struggled to penetrate. When supplies dwindled, he risked brief visits to automated mining outposts or abandoned research stations, taking only what was absolutely necessary. Throughout it all, Chit remained his only companion. The Xylo's hatchling grew with surprising speed given their limited resources. Its once pale green chitin darkened to a deep forest hue in patches, though not the obsidian black of warrior caste adults. Its limbs lengthened, movements becoming more coordinated and purposeful. Most remarkable was its apparent intelligence. Chit observed everything with keen attention, quickly learning the ship's layout and basic functions. It began mimicking Ryland's movements with increasing accuracy, the way he held tools, operated controls, even his posture when at rest. Communication remained largely nonverbal, though Chit developed a repertoire of clicks and trills that Ryland began to associate with specific meanings. A rapid double click seemed to indicate hunger. A low, sustained trill expressed curiosity. A sharp chittering unmistakably conveyed alarm or displeasure. Ryland found himself talking to the hatchling constantly, narrating his actions, explaining human concepts, even sharing fragments of his past. The one-sided conversations kept the crushing loneliness of space at bay. I grew up on Galileo Colony. He told Chit one ship cycle as he repaired a faulty power coupling, the hatchling perched on a nearby console observing his work. Mining outpost. Tough place. My father worked the deep shafts. Mother was a hydroponic specialist. Both died when the Xylos hit the colony. He paused, realizing the irony of telling this to his Xylos child. Different hive faction, probably. Not your people. Not your fault. Chit made a soft, descending trill that Rylan had come to interpret as sympathy or understanding. Join the Marines after that. Seemed the logical choice. Fight back, protect what was left. Rylan reattached the power coupling, checking the readings. 7 years of war. And what do I have to show for it? Now I'm a deserter harboring the enemy. Command would say I've lost my mind. Perhaps he had. Sometimes, in the quiet cycles when ship systems powered down to conserve energy, Rylan questioned his decisions. What was he doing? What was his endgame? He couldn't run forever. The Coalition had long reach, and Commander Valerius seemed unnaturally fixated on recapturing them. During one such period of introspection, as the ship drifted in the shadow of a massive rogue asteroid, Rylan noticed Chit behaving strangely. The hatchling had grown increasingly restless over several cycles, pacing the small cabin, orienting itself toward a specific vector of space regardless of the ship's rotation. What is it? Rylan asked, watching as Chit pressed its sensory appendages against the viewport, trilling in a pattern he hadn't heard before, rhythmic, almost melodic. That night, Rylan dreamed of vast, impossibly complex structures that pulsed with bioluminescence. He traversed corridors that felt alien, yet somehow familiar, guided by a presence he couldn't see but sensed all around him. A voice, not heard with ears but felt through his entire body, reached for him across impossible distance. He woke with a gasp, his body drenched in cold sweat. The ship's sensors were blaring, detecting an energy signature unlike anything in its database. Chit was fully alert, pressed against the main viewport, its entire body vibrating with excitement or fear. Rylan couldn't tell which. The sensor readings made no sense. Energy patterns that should be impossible, radiation and frequencies the ship's computer couldn't properly classify. Rylan ran diagnostic after diagnostic, convinced the instruments were malfunctioning. Then, 3 ship cycles later, it happened again. This time, the dream was more vivid. He stood in what felt like a vast chamber, surrounded by Xylos of various castes. Before him towered a figure of overwhelming presence, larger than the warriors, with an ornate carapace that gleamed with embedded crystalline structures. Its compound eyes fixed on him with terrifying intelligence. Guardian, a voice resonated through his consciousness. The seed is known. The path is opening. Rylan woke to find Chit staring at him, unnervingly still. The phenomena continued and intensified. Strange energy readings appeared with increasing frequency. The ship's navigation systems began experiencing unexplained anomalies. Rylan's dreams became more coherent, filled with alien landscapes and the persistent presence of the towering Xylos figure. Then came the signal. The ship's communications array, which Rylan had kept dormant to avoid detection, suddenly activated of its own accord. A powerful directed transmission bypassed the standard security protocols, manifesting as a series of complex patterns on the main display, patterns that mirrored the Xylos' written language Rylan had glimpsed in intelligence briefings. Frantically, he attempted to terminate the connection, fearing it would reveal their position to TCMC patrols. Instead, the ship's translation software engaged automatically, struggling to process the alien communication. After several tense minutes, fragmented text appeared. Guardian, the seed is known. Present yourself. The debt must be addressed. Matriarch ubekistal commands. Rylan stared at the message, a cold weight settling in his stomach. The Xylos knew about Chit. They were tracking them somehow. But what debt did they mean? Was this a demand for the return of the hatchling? A threat? Chit approached the display, reaching out to touch the alien script with what appeared to be recognition. It made a series of complex clicks that the ship's systems couldn't begin to translate. For 3 more cycles, Rylan agonized over the message and its implications. During that time, the ship's fuel cells dipped to critical levels. TCMC patrol activity increased in nearby sectors. Valerius was closing the net. Their options were disappearing rapidly. In desperation born of dwindling choices, Rylan made a gamble. Using the protocols embedded in the Xylos transmission, he crafted a response. This is Guardian of the Seed. The seed is safe. Meeting proposed to address the debt. Coordinates follow. He selected the Caldera Nebula, a treacherous region of space known for unpredictable energy storms, gravitational anomalies, and dense clouds that confounded sensors. Pirates and other outlaws sometimes used it as a haven from authorities, though many ships that entered never emerged. After transmitting the coordinates, Rylan plotted a course that would use the last of their fuel reserves. It was all or nothing now. Either this matriarch Vextau would provide answers, or they would drift powerless in the nebula until life support failed. "I hope I'm not delivering you into something worse," he told Chit as the ship entered the swirling, luminous clouds of the Caldera Nebula. The hatchling merely watched the spectacle through the viewport, its posture conveying what Rylan interpreted as anticipation rather than fear. He navigated to the designated coordinates, a field of massive crystalline asteroids that glowed with ambient radiation, creating eerie, shifting patterns of light and shadow. The scout ship's engines sputtered as they arrived, fuel cells nearly depleted. For hours, they drifted among the glowing crystals, systems powered down to minimum levels to conserve what little energy remained. Rylan began to question his decision, wondering if the transmission had been a trap or merely an automated signal with no intelligence behind it. Then the nebula clouds parted, revealing a sight that stole Rylan's breath. A massive Xylos vessel emerged silently from the multicolored gases. Unlike the angular, functional design of human ships, this craft was organically curved, its hull seemingly grown rather than constructed. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed across its surface in complex sequences. It dwarfed Rylan's small scout ship, easily 20 times its size. Despite its imposing presence, the hive ship made no aggressive moves. Instead, it positioned itself at a respectful distance before initiating contact. A communication request flashed on Rylan's console. With trembling fingers, he accepted. The cockpit illuminated with a detailed holographic projection, far more advanced than standard TCMC technology. Standing before him, rendered in perfect detail despite the distance separating their vessels, was the figure from his dreams. The Xylos matriarch stood nearly 3 meters tall, her carapace an iridescent mosaic of emerald and obsidian. Multiple compound eyes arranged in an arc across her broad head reflected Rylan's image back at him in fractured repetition. Unlike the warrior caste, her limbs were slender, almost delicate, though Rylan sensed tremendous strength in her frame. Crystalline growths protruded from her shoulders and crest, pulsing with soft internal light. Human Guardian. Her voice resonated through the ship's communication system, a complex blend of clicks and trills of the translator rendered into surprisingly nuanced Terran standard. "You have preserved the royal seed through great peril. Show me my offspring." Before Rylan could respond, Chit erupted into a flurry of excited movement, rushing to the hologram with a series of rapid, musical clicks. The hatchling positioned itself directly before the projection, displaying itself to the matriarch with what Rylan could only interpret as reverence and recognition. The matriarch's posture shifted subtly, her enormous eyes focusing intently on Chit. A low, harmonious vibration emanated from her that the ship's systems couldn't translate, but which caused Chit to grow very still, as if absorbing the sound through its entire body. "The seed thrives," she stated after a long moment. "You have provided adequate care, despite your limited understanding of our physiology. This confirms the judgment that led to your selection." "My selection?" Rylan found his voice at last. "I wasn't selected. I found your offspring, trapped during our evacuation of Viridia Prime. It was a split-second decision, not some planned extraction." The matriarch's head tilted slightly, an oddly human gesture of curiosity. "Precisely. You chose compassion when your instinct and training demanded otherwise. Such choices are not random, Human Guardian. They reveal true nature. My name is Marcus Ryland, he replied, unsure how to navigate this surreal conversation. Formé sergent, terrain coalition marine corps. And I don't understand what you mean by guardian. Names. Yes. The matriarch seemed to consider this. I am Vextal, primary matriarch of the 7th Hive Cluster. And you, Marcus Ryland, became Kadar, lifebound guardian, the moment you risked yourself to save a royal seed. This is our highest law, predating even our expansion beyond our homeworld. She moved her upper limbs in a complex gesture that the hologram captured perfectly. When one saves a matriarchal seed from certain death, especially through personal risk and defiance of one's own kind, they become intrinsically linked to that seed's fate. The bond is not requested or granted. It simply is invoked by action. Ryland struggled to process what she was saying. You're telling me that by saving your child, I'm somehow bound to it by your laws. Laws I never agreed to and didn't even know existed. Precisely. Vextal's tone remained neutral, matter of fact. The Kadar bond transcends species, intent, and consent. It is recognized by all hive clusters. You are now under the protection of matriarch law, but also bound to service to the seed and, by extension, to me. Ryland ran a hand through his hair, struggling with the implications. So what? You're here to collect us both? Make me some kind of alien pet guardian? Your understanding is incomplete, but not entirely inaccurate, Vextal replied. The royal seed must return to continue proper development within the hive. As Kadar, your place is. Her explanation was abruptly cut short as proximity alarms blared throughout Ryland's ship. Multiple vessels were dropping out of jump space around them, their sudden appearance sending ripples through the nebula's swirling gases. Ryland's tactical display identified the largest signature immediately. The TCMC cruiser Retribution, Commander Valerius's command vessel. Flanking it were 4 smaller Coalition patrol craft, weapons systems already powering up. Simultaneously, 3 sleek Xylos vessels appeared from the opposite vector. Their configuration was different from Vextal's hive ship. More angular, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in harsh, rapid sequences. Matriarch came a new voice over the communication channel. This one also Xylos, but male sharper. Surrender the seed and withdraw. The 7th cluster's time has ended. The Council acknowledges Chak as rightful overseer of this sector. Vextal's posture transformed instantly, her previously regal bearing becoming rigid with what Ryland recognized as combat readiness. Warlord Chak, she responded, her translator rendering her voice with icy precision. Your treachery confirms your unworthiness. The Council has made no such ruling. Before this exchange could continue, another communication cut across all channels, this one an unfiltered Terran standard. Attention rogue, TCMC vessel, and all Xylos craft. This is Commander Valerius of the Terran Coalition cruiser Retribution. You have entered restricted Coalition space. The fugitive Marcus Ryland is wanted for high treason, theft of military property, and bioweapon trafficking. Surrender immediately or face immediate neutralization. The tactical display showed both the Coalition vessels and Chak Xylos ships moving to establish a pincer formation around Ryland's scout ship and Vextal's hive ship. It was a coordinated attack pattern, too coordinated to be coincidental. They're working together, Ryland realized aloud. Valerius and this Chak, they coordinated this ambush. Vextal's hologram turned toward him, her alien features unreadable but her voice, tinged with what might have been grim confirmation. The attack on Viridia Prime bore the hallmarks of Chak's tactics, yet occurred with unusual precision and timing. We suspected human intelligence involvement. Now we have confirmation. The implications staggered Ryland. A coalition officer conspiring with an enemy faction? How deep did this corruption go? Marcus Ryland, Vextal spoke urgently as the enemy vessels closed in. The Kadar bond gives me no authority to command you, only to request your service. Will you fight alongside me to protect the seed? Your knowledge of human tactical systems would provide significant advantage. Ryland looked at the tactical display, at the approaching vessels, then at Chit, who watched him with what he now recognized as absolute trust. In that moment, his path became clear. Transmitting tactical data now, he responded, fingers flying across the console. Coalition vessels have shield vulnerabilities at junction points. Attack pattern suggests Valerius will hold position while the patrol craft engage directly. Vextal's hologram nodded once. Uploading countermeasures to your ship's systems. Follow my hive ship's lead, Guardian. Fight or perish with the seed. The nebula erupted into chaos as both enemy forces launched their assault. Chak's ships fired first, targeting Vextal's hive ship with weapons that sent rippling distortions through space itself. Simultaneously, the Coalition patrol craft broke formation, accelerating toward Ryland's position. Using the tactical data Ryland had provided, Vextal's hive ship targeted the vulnerable shield junctions of the approaching Coalition vessels. Streams of luminescent projectiles erupted from the organic ports along its hull, striking with unerring precision. One patrol craft veered off immediately, its shields fluctuating wildly. Ryland pushed his small scout ship to its limits, using the crystalline asteroids as cover while targeting Chak's vessels with the countermeasures Vextal had uploaded to his systems. The scout wasn't designed for direct combat, but the Xylo's upgrades allowed him to temporarily disrupt the enemy ship's bioelectronic systems. Ryland, Commander Valerius's voice cut through the chaos, transmitted directly to his ship. You've betrayed everything you swore to protect. Surrender now, and I'll ensure your court-martial is fair. Like you ensured fair treatment for Xylo's civilians on Viridia Prime? Ryland shot back, narrowly evading weapons fire from a Coalition patrol craft. How long have you been working with Chak, Commander? Does High Command know you're conspiring with the enemy? The momentary silence told him everything. The battle intensified as Valerius's cruiser moved to engage directly, its superior firepower threatening to overwhelm both Ryland and Vextal. Meanwhile, Chak's vessels executed a flanking maneuver, attempting to isolate the hive ship from Ryland's support. Guardian, Vextal communicated as her hive ship absorbed punishing fire from multiple directions. The nebula contains a spatial anomaly at coordinates I am transmitting. Navigate there immediately. I'm not abandoning you, Ryland responded, using the last of his offensive capabilities to draw fire away from the hive ship. Not abandonment. Strategy. Vextal's hive ship suddenly accelerated toward Chak's lead vessel, unleashing a devastating barrage that momentarily disrupted its bioluminescent patterns. The anomaly. Now, trusting her judgment, Ryland plotted a course to the transmitted coordinates, deeper into the nebula where the gas clouds grew increasingly turbulent. As he approached, his instruments detected massive gravitational fluctuations and unpredictable energy discharges, a natural phenomenon that would scramble sensors and disrupt weapons targeting. Behind him, Vextal's hive ship disengaged from its direct confrontation with Chak and accelerated toward his position, absorbing heavy fire from Valerius's cruiser. One of its propulsion nodes was clearly damaged, leaking luminescent energy into the nebula. As both their vessels reached the anomaly's perimeter, the pursuing ships hesitated, clearly detecting the hazardous conditions ahead. Valerius's cruiser launched a final salvo of missiles that detonated short of their targets as the anomaly's energy field disrupted their guidance systems. The nebula swirled violently around them as Ryland's scout ship and Vextal's damaged hive ship plunged into the heart of the anomaly. Space itself seemed to fold and distort, sensors failing completely as reality bent in ways human science hadn't categorized. For terrifying moments, Ryland lost all sense of orientation and proximity. When the turbulence finally subsided, they had emerged in an unfamiliar region of space, far from their pursuers. The nebula's gases here were calmer, tinged with soft blues and purples rather than the angry reds and oranges of the combat zone. Vextal's hive ship drifted nearby, its damaged sections already beginning to regenerate through some form of organic repair process Ryland had never witnessed before. The holographic communication re-established, though flickering with interference. "You fought well, Guardian," Vextal acknowledged, her form partially obscured by static. "The seed witnessed your courage." Chit approached the hologram again, making a series of rapid clicks that seemed to convey excitement or relief. "Your vessel requires extensive repair," Vextal continued. "Follow my guidance to the Sanctuary Outpost. There we may speak more of the path before us." The Sanctuary Outpost proved to be a massive, hollowed-out asteroid transformed into a hidden Xylos base. Unlike the aggressive, fortified installations Coalition intelligence had documented, this structure emphasized habitation and sustainability. Bioluminescent organisms provided light and atmosphere processing. Living architecture adapted to its inhabitants' needs rather than standing rigid and unchanging. Ryland's damaged scout ship was guided to a docking chamber where it was enveloped in a translucent, membrane-like structure that appeared to be both scanning and beginning to repair the vessel. Around them, Xylos of various castes moved with purpose. Not the warriors Ryland had fought against for years, but workers, technicians, and what appeared to be a scholarly caste within large cranial structures. When Ryland finally emerged from his ship, still cradling Chit protectively, he found himself under the curious observation of dozens of Xylos. They maintained a respectful distance, but their collective attention was palpable. He realized with sudden clarity that he was likely the first human to ever set foot in such a place, at least voluntarily. Vextal appeared personally to escort him, her actual physical presence even more imposing than her hologram had suggested. She moved with fluid grace despite her size, the crystalline structures on her carapace catching and reflecting the ambient light. "Welcome to Colony Secondary," she said without preamble. "This outpost serves as a sanctuary and research center, removed from primary war efforts." "I'm surprised you're allowing me to see this," Ryland replied, taking in the alien environment with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "Aren't you concerned I'll report its location to Coalition forces?" Vextal made a sound that the translator rendered as something between amusement and resignation. "The Kadar bond changes your status completely, Marcus Ryland. You are now legally part of the 7th Hive Cluster. Reporting our location would harm your own protected status. Additionally," she gestured to an observation portal that revealed the swirling, chaotic space outside. "The spatial anomaly we traversed makes conventional navigation impossible. We exist in what your scientists might call a pocket dimension, accessible only through specific gravitational alignments." She led him through corridors that seemed to pulse with life, to a chamber clearly designed for diplomatic functions. Nutrient dispensers provided sustenance suitable for both species, a detail that suggested this room had been prepared specifically for this meeting. As they settled into positions around a central illumination pool, Chit left Ryland's side for the first time since their escape from the Vindicator. The hatchling approached Vextal, who lowered herself to perform what appeared to be a greeting ritual. Gentle touches of sensory appendages, exchange of pheromones, or information Ryland couldn't perceive. The royal seed's development progresses well despite the unconventional circumstances, Vextal noted, her tone revealing genuine relief. "You have cared for my offspring with more understanding than I would have thought possible for a human." "I did what seemed right," Ryland replied simply, "though I still don't understand how Chit, the royal seed, came to be on Viridia Prime during an active combat zone. Surely that's not normal procedure for Xylos royalty." Vextal's posture stiffened momentarily. It was not procedure at all. It was treachery. The caretakers were transporting the seed to a development chamber when they were betrayed from within. Agents of Chak redirected their shuttle to Viridia Prime during the conflict, assuming the seed would perish in a human counterattack or be captured and destroyed by your forces. She fixed her multifaceted gaze on Ryland. "Instead, against all probability, a human soldier with an unprecedented capacity for cross-species empathy found my offspring and risked everything to ensure its survival." Her head tilted again in that curious gesture. Such improbabilities suggest purpose beyond coincidence. Rylan shifted uncomfortably. Let's stick to what we know for certain. Valerius is collaborating with Chak. That suggests corruption within Coalition Command, possibly extending beyond just one officer. Meanwhile, you have rival factions within. Your own species actively working against you. We're both facing enemies on multiple fronts. Indeed, Vextal's response was measured, calculating. Which brings us to the matter of your status and future, Kadar. About that, Rylan interjected. I appreciate that you've provided sanctuary, but I'm not sure I accept this life-bound guardian role your laws have assigned me. I didn't volunteer for it. Yet you have fulfilled it perfectly, Vextal countered. Every action since recovering the seed has demonstrated the essence of Kadar duty. Protection at all costs, defiance of false authority, courage against overwhelming odds. She leaned forward slightly. The bond is not servitude, Marcus Rylan. It is recognition of a connection already forged through action. Chit returned to Rylan's side, as if to emphasize this point, settling comfortably against him with a soft trilling sound. The reality of our situation is this, Vextal continued. You cannot return to human space. Commander Valerius has undoubtedly reported you killed in action or labeled you an irredeemable traitor. Your knowledge of his conspiracy makes you a significant threat he cannot allow to exist. Similarly, I cannot simply release you without acknowledging the Kadar bond. It would undermine fundamental hive law and further weaken my position against Chak's faction. Rylan considered this, recognizing the truth in her assessment. His old life was gone. The question now was what shape his new one would take. What exactly would being this Kadar entail? He asked finally. What would you expect of me? Protection of the royal seed remains your primary duty, but that extends to the hive's interests as well, Vextal explained. Your unique perspective and knowledge of human military operations would provide tactical advantage. You would hold honored status within the 7th cluster, with all attendant protections and responsibilities. She paused, studying his reaction. In more immediate terms, your insight into Valerius's methods and potential weaknesses could help disrupt his alliance with Chak, a goal that serves both our interests. Rylan glanced down at Chit, who watched the exchange with evident understanding despite its youth. The hatchling had changed his life irrevocably the moment he'd made the choice to save it. Now that choice had led him here, to this impossible crossroads. A human soldier considering alliance with an enemy matriarch against corrupted elements of his own military. Yet something about it felt right, as if the universe had been guiding him toward this junction all along. I won't fight against innocent humans, he stated firmly. I won't participate in attacks on civilian colonies or legitimate coalition forces who are just following orders like I once did. Understood and accepted, Vextal replied without hesitation. Our target is corruption, not humanity itself. Rylan nodded slowly, coming to his decision. Then I accept the role of Kadar, at least as you've defined it. I'll help you expose Valerius and Chak's conspiracy and protect CH, the royal seed. The name you have given, Chit, is acceptable, Vextal said, with what might have been the Xylo's equivalent of amusement. The seed has clearly bonded to that designation. As if in confirmation, Chit made a happy clicking sound at hearing its name. The following cycles brought rapid adjustment as Rylan settled into his unprecedented new position. The Xylos of Colony Secondary regarded him with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and occasional wariness. Reactions he found ironically similar to how his fellow Marines had often treated him when his decisions didn't follow conventional strategy. Vextal provided quarters suitable for human habitation, though adapted with Xylo's aesthetics. She also granted him access to certain areas of the colony and restricted data archives that helped him understand Xylo's culture and the complex political landscape of their various hive clusters. He learned that Vextal was considered progressive among matriarchs, advocating for eventual diplomatic relations with humans rather than continued total war. Chak represented the opposite extreme, expansion through conquest, viewing other species as resources rather than potential allies. Their ideological conflict had raged for generations, with various hive clusters aligning with one philosophy or the other. Chit continued to develop rapidly, now able to communicate in simple Terran standard phrases alongside its native clicks and trills. Its intelligence was clearly exceptional, absorbing information at a rate that would have impressed the most demanding human educators. 3 colony cycles after their arrival, Vextal summoned Rylan to a tactical chamber where 3-dimensional projections displayed recent intelligence gathering. Xylo's operators manipulated the displays with precise movements of their sensory appendages, focusing on specific sectors of space near the Coalition Xylo's border. "We have confirmed Valerius's next move," Vextal informed him as he entered. "His cruiser Retribution has been reassigned to guard duty at the Coalition Research Outpost Helios Station." Ryland studied the projected image of the station, a sprawling scientific installation orbiting a dwarf star. That's unusual. Helios is primarily civilian research, focused on stellar phenomena. Why would they assign a warship of that class to guard it? Precisely the question that drew our attention, Vextal agreed. Further intelligence suggests the station has been partially repurposed for classified weapons research, specifically adaptations of Xylo's biological technology. The implications clicked into place immediately. Valerius is providing Chak with human technology in exchange for Xylo's bioweapons. He's positioned himself at Helios to facilitate the exchange directly, under the guise of routine protection duty. Vextal nodded, the gesture adopted from human communication styles. The exchange is scheduled to occur in 4 cycles. Chak himself will attend, a rare emergence from his protected territories. Ryland saw the opportunity immediately. If we can document the exchange and transmit proof to both Coalition High Command and your Hive Council simultaneously, we could expose both Valerius and Chak, disrupting their alliance and forcing investigations on both sides. My thoughts align with yours, Kadar, Vextal confirmed. However, approaching Helios Station presents significant challenges. It lies within heavily monitored Coalition space. My vessels cannot approach without triggering immediate military response. Rylan considered the problem, studying the tactical projections. We need something smaller, less detectable than a hive ship. My scout vessel has been repaired, and with the Xylo's modifications your engineers have added, its signature can be masked to appear as routine maintenance traffic. He pointed to a specific approach vector. This trajectory would allow us to use the star's radiation to further obscure our approach. We wouldn't need to dock, just get close enough to observe and record the exchange, then transmit the evidence through encrypted channels directly to leadership on both sides. Vextal's crystalline structures pulsed with increased luminosity, a sign of approval or excitement, Rylan had learned. A sound strategy. However, I cannot risk you undertaking this mission alone. The Kadar must be protected. I don't need, Rylan began, then caught himself. After weeks among the Xylos, he'd learned that certain cultural concepts were non-negotiable. The protection of a Kadar was one such imperative. Fine. A small tactical team, then. No warriors. They're too recognizable. Perhaps members of your scout or infiltration caste. Agreed, Vextal said. I will select the team personally. She paused, studying him with her compound eyes. This mission carries exceptional risk, Marcus Rylan. Failure would mean certain death. Even success may not guarantee acceptance by either of our kinds. Rylan thought of his former life, of the straight lines of military hierarchy and clear enemies. He thought of Rostova and his squad, of the oath he'd sworn to the Coalition. Then he looked at the alien environment around him, at the complex being who had once been his enemy and was now his unlikely ally. Finally, he thought of Chit, who represented a future none of them could clearly envision. Sometimes the right path isn't the one you expected to walk, he said finally. Let's prepare. 2 cycles later, Ryland's scout ship detached from Colony Secondary, carrying himself and 3 Xylos of the Infiltrator caste, smaller, more agile members of the species specialized in stealth and information gathering. Their adaptive carapaces could shift coloration to blend with surroundings, and their sensory capabilities far exceeded standard warriors. The voyage to Helios Station required traversing the spatial anomaly that protected Colony Secondary, then a series of precise jump calculations to avoid standard Coalition patrol routes. The modifications to his ship performed beautifully, masking their approach as they finally entered the outer sensor perimeter of the research station. The dwarf star's radiation provided the cover Rylan had anticipated, allowing them to establish an observation position among the maintenance satellites that orbited the station at a respectful distance. From here, they could monitor approaching vessels and communication traffic without triggering proximity alerts. "Impressive," commented TX Liar, the lead infiltrator, as they settled into position. "Your understanding of human security protocols provides significant advantage. 7 years fighting against your people taught me to think like both predator and prey," Rylan replied as he calibrated the enhanced sensor array. "Now we wait." They didn't wait long. Within hours, their sensors detected a vessel approaching from the opposite side of the dwarf star, a configuration unlike standard Coalition or commercial designs. Its hull appeared to be a hybrid, combining human metallic construction with organic elements characteristic of Xylos technology. "Chak-S personal transport," TX Liar confirmed, analyzing the signal pattern. "Disguised, but the core biometric signature is unmistakable." Simultaneously, the Retribution adjusted its patrol pattern, positioning itself to intercept the approaching vessel in what would appear to be routine identification procedures. To casual observation, it would seem like a Coalition warship performing standard security protocols. "Recording all channels," Rylan confirmed as they watched the carefully choreographed dance unfold. The hybrid vessel transmitted identification codes that the Retribution acknowledged after the appropriate procedural delay. "They're communicating on an encrypted frequency. Can your systems penetrate it?" TX Liar extended specialized appendages toward the ship's modified console. "Partial decryption possible. The encryption contains elements of both technologies, but patterns are recognizable." Fragmented transmissions began filtering through their systems, confirming what they had suspected. Valerius and Chak were coordinating the exchange of weapons technology. Coalition energy weaponry and shield specifications traded for advanced Xylos bioweapons and genetic manipulation techniques. More disturbing were references to planned demonstrations of these combined technologies on border settlements to create justification for escalated military responses on both sides. Their engineering provocations, Rylan realized with growing horror. False flag attacks to justify expanded war powers and eliminate opposition within both hierarchies. As they watched, a shuttle departed from the Retribution, making its way toward Chak-S vessel. Simultaneously, another shuttle launched from the hybrid ship, presumably carrying Chak-S contribution to their corrupt partnership. The exchange would happen in deep space, away from the station's direct observation. "We have sufficient evidence," TX Liar indicated. "Recommend immediate transmission to both authorities." Rylan nodded, preparing the encrypted data packages they had prepared, one for Coalition High Command, another for the Xylos Hive Council. Each contained irrefutable evidence of treachery that neither leadership could ignore without compromising their own authority. Just as he activated the transmission sequence, proximity alarms blared throughout the scout ship. A small combat vessel had detached from the Retribution and was accelerating directly toward their position. "We've been detected," Rylan announced grimly, already engaging evasive protocols. "Transmission status?" "Signals away," TX Liar confirmed. "Both packages transmitted successfully. However, enemy vessel will intercept us before we can reach jump threshold." Rylan studied the tactical display, calculating options. The approaching vessel was a Terran Wasp-class interceptor, fast, heavily armed, and specifically designed for disabling smaller craft. Their scout ship, despite its modifications, wasn't built for direct combat. "They want us alive," he realized, noting the interceptor's weapon configuration. "Valerius will want to interrogate us, learn how much we know and who else has been informed." A decision crystallized in his mind. "TX Liar, take your team to the escape pod. Set course for these coordinates." He quickly input a vector that would use the dwarf star's gravity well to accelerate them beyond pursuit range. I'll draw off the interceptor, keep them focused on the main ship. The Xylo's infiltrator's compound eyes fixed on him. The Kadar cannot be sacrificed. Protocol is clear. This isn't sacrifice, it's tactical necessity, Rylan countered firmly. Someone needs to ensure the evidence reaches Vextal, regardless of what happens to the transmissions. You three have the best chance of evading capture while I create a diversion. After a moment of apparent internal calculation, TX Liar inclined his head in acceptance. Your strategy is sound, if regrettable. The matriarch will mount immediate rescue operations. I'm counting on it, Rylan replied with a grim smile. Now go. As the escape pod detached, carrying the three infiltrators toward the calculated trajectory, Rylan programmed the scout ship to emit a widened electrical signature, making it appear as if the entire crew remained aboard. He then engaged the engines at maximum thrust, deliberately moving perpendicular to the escape pod's vector, drawing the interceptor's attention fully to his vessel. The deception worked. The Wasp-class altered course to pursue the more substantial target, ignoring the smaller escape pod as it disappeared into the star's corona radiation. Rylan led the interceptor on a twisting chase through the outer regions of the research station's territory, buying precious time for his companions while knowing his own capture was inevitable. When the interceptor finally locked its disabling pulse onto his engines, Rylan felt an unexpected sense of peace. He had completed the mission. The evidence was transmitted. The Xylos team would reach Vextal with confirmation. Whatever happened to him now, the conspiracy would be exposed. As his ship drifted powerless in space, awaiting the interceptor's boarding party, Rylan thought of Chit, the unlikely catalyst for this extraordinary journey. He thought of the Kadar bond that had changed his life's trajectory so completely. Most of all, he thought of the strange new path he'd found himself walking. Neither fully human nor Xylos, but something unprecedented between worlds. The airlock cycled open behind him. Heavy boots stepped onto the deck. Rylan turned slowly to face his captors, displaying empty hands. Former Sergeant Marcus Rylan, came the cold voice of Commander Valerius as he stepped through the hatchway, flanked by armored security personnel. You've led us on quite a chase. Hello, Commander, Rylan replied calmly. I assume you received my transmission, the one detailing your treason against the Coalition. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Valerius's face, confirmation enough that the transmission had indeed reached its target. His expression quickly hardened again. Interesting accusations from a deserter who abandoned his post to aid the enemy. No one will believe the desperate lies of a traitor. Perhaps not, Rylan acknowledged. But they'll believe documented evidence. And they'll certainly investigate why a decorated commander diverted crucial warship resources to guard a research station, only to rendezvous with an unregistered vessel in defiance of standard protocols. Valerius's jaw tightened. Take him to the Retribution, he ordered his security team. Full restraints, isolated detention. No communication with any other personnel. As the security officers moved to apply neural restraints, Rylan offered no resistance. His part in this phase was complete. Now, it was a waiting game, to see which would come first. A Coalition investigation triggered by his evidence, or Vextal's inevitable response to the capture of her Kadar. Either way, the careful plans of Valerius and Chak were unraveling. The truth of their conspiracy would emerge, changing the course of the conflict between their species. And somewhere in that shifting future lay the hope of something better, a path that Chit and others of both species might walk together. The detention cell aboard the Retribution was a stark contrast to the organic, adaptive environment of Colony Secondary. Cold metal walls, harsh lighting, and absolute silence. Valerius had placed him in high-security isolation, cut off from all ship systems and personnel. 4-3 ship cycles. Rylan saw no one except the automated service drones that delivered minimal nutrition packs and collected waste. No interrogation, no questions, no acknowledgement of his existence. The psychological tactic was obvious, sensory deprivation to break down resistance before formal questioning began. On the fourth cycle, the cell door finally opened to admit Commander Valerius himself, accompanied by two security officers who positioned themselves at the entrance, weapons ready. "Comfortable, Rylan?" Valerius asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "I apologize for the delayed welcome. Events have required my attention." Rylan studied the commander carefully, noting the subtle signs of strain, the tightness around his eyes, the slightly disheveled appearance of his typically immaculate uniform. "Problems with your Xylo's business partner, Commander?" "Chak doesn't strike me as the forgiving type." A muscle twitched in Valerius's jaw. "Your transmissions were intercepted before they reached any meaningful command structure. Your Xylo's accomplices have been eliminated. You've accomplished nothing except ensuring your own execution for treason." The confidence with which he delivered these statements might have been convincing, if Rylan hadn't spent weeks learning to read Xylo's communication patterns, where truth and deception manifested in entirely different ways than human tells. Valerius was lying, and not particularly well. "Then why am I still alive?" Rylan countered calmly. "If you've contained the situation so effectively, why waste resources keeping a traitor fed and housed? The Magnus Protocol for capture deserters is quite clear on the appropriate response." Valerius's expression hardened. "Perhaps I'm simply curious about your unprecedented betrayal. A decorated Marine with an exemplary record suddenly absconds with an enemy biological specimen, then resurfaces in the company of Xylo's infiltrators. What prompted such an extraordinary defection, Sergeant?" "Conscience," Rylan replied simply. "When I found the hatchling, alone, orphaned, terrified, I saw past years of conditioning and recognized another living being in need. One decision led to another, and here we are." He leaned forward slightly. "The real question, Commander, is what prompted your betrayal? What did Chak offer that was worth turning against your own species?" Valerius's face flushed with anger. "You understand nothing. The Xylo's war is unwinnable through conventional means. Their reproductive capacity outpaces our ability to counter it. Their biological adaptability makes standard warfare ineffective long-term." He began pacing the small cell. "Chak offered a partnership, targeted strikes against rival hive clusters like Vextals, providing us with bioweapon technology we could reverse engineer for our own defense. A path to ending the war on favorable terms." "On Chak's terms," Rylan corrected. "He's using you, Commander. The moment your usefulness ends, so will any pretense of alliance. You're nothing but a temporary tool to eliminate his Xylo's rivals." "Think what you want," Valerius dismissed, though uncertainty flickered briefly across his features. "Your opinion is irrelevant. Within the next 24 hours, you'll be transferred to a secure facility for formal interrogation and trial. I suggest you consider what information might be valuable enough to spare you the maximum penalty for your crimes." As Valerius turned to leave, Rylan called after him. "You've received orders from command, haven't you? That's why you're keeping me alive, because someone higher up the chain wants answers about your irregular deployments around Viridia Prime and Helio Station. The investigation has already begun, hasn't it?" The commander froze momentarily, his posture tensing before he continued toward the door without responding. His silence confirmed Rylan's suspicion more effectively than any denial could have. Left alone again, Rylan allowed himself a small smile. The transmissions had reached their targets, or at least raised sufficient questions to prompt investigation. Now, it was a matter of time and survival. That night, as artificial ship's darkness descended on his cell, Rylan experienced something new, a dream more vivid than any he'd had before. He stood in the grand chamber he recognized from Colony Secondary, but it was filled with dozens of Xylos of various castes. At the center stood Vextal, with Chit at her side. The hatchling had grown considerably in the dream, its posture more assured, its movements more deliberate. "The bond remains, Kadar." Vextal's voice resonated through his consciousness. "Distance cannot sever it. The seed feels your absence and demands resolution." "I'm aboard the Retribution," Rylan found himself responding, understanding somehow that this was more than a dream. Valerius has me in isolation. Transfer scheduled within 24 hours. We have tracked the vessel, Vextal confirmed. The evidence you provided has created the disruption we anticipated. Chak's position is compromised. Your coalition command has dispatched investigators to Helios Station. Valerius will eliminate evidence before they arrive, Rylan warned. Perhaps. Vextal's image shifted, becoming more focused. But he cannot eliminate you without raising further questions. And we will not allow your transfer to proceed. Prepare yourself, Qatar. The seventh cluster protects its own. Rylan woke with a start, the dream lingering with unusual clarity. Had it been merely his subconscious processing hopes and fears, or something more? The Xylos had abilities humans had only begun to understand, subtle psionic connections that allowed hive communication across vast distances. Could the Kadar bond extend such capabilities to him? He had no time to contemplate this question further. The ship's alarm system suddenly activated, its harsh tone indicating a serious threat rather than a drill or minor emergency. The overhead lighting shifted to combat status, red-tinged and pulsing. "Attention all personnel," came the automated announcement. "Unknown vessels detected on intercept course. Combat status Alpha. All crew to battle stations." Rylan moved to the cell's small viewport, which offered a limited view of space beyond the Retribution. In the distance, he could see them, 3 Xylos vessels, but not the standard combat configurations documented in Coalition intelligence. These ships moved differently, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in sequences he recognized from Colony Secondary. Vextal had come for him. The next hours passed in a surreal haze of alarms, distant weapons fire, and the occasional violent shuddering of the Retribution as it absorbed attacks. Rylan remained locked in his cell, isolated from the battle, but sensing its progress through the ship's movements and automated announcements. The Xylos vessels employed tactics he'd never witnessed before, not seeking to destroy the Retribution outright, but systematically targeting specific systems, weapons arrays, propulsion nodes, communication relays. They were disabling the ship piece by piece, like surgeons excising a tumor while preserving surrounding tissue. Eventually, the overhead lighting failed completely, replaced by the dim emergency illumination reserved for critical system failure. The artificial gravity fluctuated, creating moments of weightlessness followed by disorienting returns to normal mass. Through it all, Rylan waited, knowing his role in this operation was simply to be ready when opportunity presented itself. That opportunity came in the form of a localized explosion that breached the hull several compartments from his cell. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the section, but not before the concussive force disabled the electronic locking mechanisms on several detention units, including his. Rylan pushed the cell door open, finding the corridor beyond deserted, security personnel having responded to more urgent threats elsewhere. Emergency protocols would prioritize hull breaches and critical systems over a single detainee, especially with external attack ongoing. He navigated the familiar corridors of the Coalition vessel with practiced ease, avoiding the main junctions where response teams would be concentrated. Years of Marine training had included detailed knowledge of ship layouts and emergency protocols, knowledge he now used against his former comrades. Making his way toward the source of the breach, Rylan encountered surprisingly little resistance. The few crew members he did encounter were focused entirely on damage control, barely registering his presence as he moved confidently through the chaos. He appropriated a standard-issue emergency breathing apparatus from a wall station, preparing for the possibility of decompressed sections ahead. When he finally reached the breach zone, he found exactly what he'd expected. The explosion had not been random, but precisely targeted, creating an access point to an adjacent maintenance bay where a small Xylos boarding craft had attached itself to the Retribution's hull like a parasite. 2 Xylos warriors stood guard at the improvised airlock, their carapaces bearing the distinctive markings of Vextal's personal guard. They recognized him immediately, their postures shifting from combat readiness to respectful acknowledgement. "Kadar," One clicked in heavily accented Terran standard. The passage is secured. We must depart immediately. Rylan nodded, following them into the organic confines of the boarding craft. Inside, a pilot of the navigator caste was already initiating separation procedures, the craft's membrane-like airlock sealing behind them with a soft squelching sound. The matriarch awaits your return, the lead warrior informed him as they detached from the Retribution's hull. The royal seed has been distressed. In your absence, the small craft accelerated away from the disabled Coalition vessel, joining the three larger Xylos ships that had conducted the precision attack. As they formed up for departure, Rylan glimpsed the Retribution through a viewport, still intact but clearly crippled, drifting with minimal power and no weapons capability. Vextal had kept her word. The rescue had been conducted with surgical precision, minimizing casualties while achieving the objective. It was a level of restraint that contradicted everything Coalition intelligence claimed about Xylos warfare. As the small fleet prepared to jump to their hidden sanctuary, Rylan wondered how many other misconceptions existed on both sides of this conflict, and whether the disruption he and Vextal had set in motion might finally create space for those misconceptions to be challenged. The return to Colony Secondary was marked by a ceremony Rylan hadn't anticipated. The entire population of the outpost gathered in the central chamber, arranged in precise hierarchical patterns that reflected caste and function within the hive structure. At the center, elevated on a platform of living crystal, stood Vextal with Chit at her side. The hatchling had indeed grown in Rylan's absence, its form more defined, its movements more purposeful. When it spotted Rylan entering the chamber, it emitted a series of excited clicks and rushed forward, breaking protocol in a way that caused murmurs among the assembled Xylos. Rylan knelt to receive the enthusiastic greeting, Chit's sensory appendages touching his face in what he'd come to recognize as their unique form of communication. Emotions transferred that transcended language: relief, joy, connection. The royal seed has been inconsolable in your absence, Vextal noted as Rylan approached the central platform, Chit now walking proudly at his side. The Kathar bond has proven stronger than anticipated. I felt it too, Rylan admitted, recalling the vivid dream communication. Even aboard the Retribution, something connected us. Vextal's crystalline structures pulsed with acknowledgement. The Hive Council has received our evidence regarding Chak's treachery. Combined with parallel revelations within your Coalition command structure, it has created unprecedented circumstances. She gestured toward a secondary platform where a human figure stood, a woman in the formal gray uniform of Coalition Diplomatic Corps. With a shock of recognition, Rylan identified her as Admiral Helena Chun, Director of Coalition Intelligence and one of the highest-ranking officials in human space. Sergeant Rylan, the Admiral acknowledged, her expression carefully neutral. Or perhaps Kathar is more appropriate now. Admiral, Rylan responded cautiously, unsure how to navigate this unexpected development. May I ask how you came to be here? The evidence you transmitted regarding Commander Valerius and his Xylos collaborator proved compelling enough to warrant direct investigation, she replied. When we arrived at Helios Station, we found it abandoned, but not before Valerius had attempted to destroy significant evidence. Fortunately, he was interrupted. Admiral Chung glanced toward Vextal with something approaching respect. Matriarch Vextal contacted Coalition Command directly, using channels we didn't realize were compromised. She proposed a meeting to discuss the implications of what you both uncovered. Given the circumstances, I volunteered to represent Coalition interests. The implications were staggering. A high-ranking Coalition official and a Xylos matriarch meeting openly on neutral ground? It was unprecedented in the 7-year history of the conflict. The war has benefited neither of our species, Vextal stated, addressing the assembly as much as Rylan and the Admiral. It has merely created opportunities for corruption and power consolidation by elements like Chak and Valerius, who profit from continued conflict. The Coalition Council remains skeptical, Admiral Chen cautioned. 7 years of hostilities aren't erased by one instance of cooperation. however significant. Indeed, Vextal agreed, which is why we propose a more substantive demonstration of new possibilities. She turned to Rylan, her massive form somehow conveying solemnity despite its alien configuration. Marcus Rylan, Kadar to the royal seed, you occupy a unique position between our worlds. Neither fully human nor Xylos, yet connected to both. Would you serve as intermediary in the establishment of preliminary diplomatic relations between the Seventh Hive Cluster and the Terran Coalition? The chamber fell silent, all attention focused on Rylan. He felt the weight of history pressing upon him. The improbable journey from Marine Sergeant to deserter to alien guardian had led him to this moment, this impossible crossroads. I'm a soldier, not a diplomat, he said finally. But if my position as Kadar can help prevent more worlds like Viridia Prime from burning, then yes. I'll serve however I can. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. The Coalition Council has provisionally approved a limited diplomatic initiative, contingent on concrete steps toward de-escalation in disputed territories. Your unique status provides a framework that both sides can accept without losing face. The Council of Matriarchs has similarly approved preliminary exchanges, Vextal confirmed. Chak's faction remains opposed, but his influence has waned considerably since the exposure of his collaboration with coalition elements. Chit chirped excitedly, sensing the historical significance of the moment, even if it couldn't fully comprehend all implications. In the days that followed, Rylan found himself navigating uncharted territory, helping establish protocols for the first formal communication channels between humans and Xylos that weren't focused on military engagement. Admiral Chun and her small team remained at Colony Secondary, working directly with Vextal's advisors to identify potential areas of mutual interest and reduced hostility. The process was fraught with misunderstandings and near disasters. Cultural assumptions and translation errors created moments of tension that required Rylan's unique perspective to resolve. His time in both worlds allowed him to bridge gaps neither side fully recognized existed. Throughout it all, Chit remained his constant companion, growing and learning with remarkable speed. The hatchling absorbed human concepts alongside its native Xylos education, developing a perspective that was neither fully one nor the other, much like Rylan himself. One cycle, as they stood together observing a heated discussion between coalition scientists and Xylos knowledge keepers regarding compatible research methodologies, Chit surprised him with a perfectly formed Terran standard sentence. They see with different eyes, the young Xylos observed, watching the interaction with obvious fascination. But look at same stars. Rylan glanced down at his unlikely ward, struck by the profound simplicity of the observation. Yes, he agreed quietly. That's exactly the problem, and the opportunity. In that moment, watching human and Xylos struggling to find common ground while a child of both worlds observed their efforts, Marcus Rylan understood the true meaning of the Kadar bond. He wasn't merely a guardian appointed by alien law or circumstance. He was the bridge, the living connection between worlds that had forgotten how to see the same stars. The path ahead remained uncertain. The preliminary diplomatic initiatives might succeed or fail. The war might resume with renewed vigor or gradually transform into something else entirely. Chak and others like him would continue to resist change, as would many within the coalition who had built careers on conflict. But something had begun here, something neither he nor Vextal could have anticipated when he made that split-second decision in the ruins of Viridia Prime. A possibility, fragile but real, that transcended the boundaries both species had assumed were immutable. As he watched Chit move confidently between the human and Xylos delegations, occasionally translating concepts that defied standard translation, Rylan felt a sense of purpose more profound than any military objective had ever provided. He had crossed the ultimate line, from human soldier to alien guardian, and in doing so, had helped create a line that both species might someday cross together. The matriarch had wanted him for reasons beyond his understanding. Now, against all probability, he had become exactly what both their worlds needed. Not enemy or ally, but something entirely new. The Kadar who guarded not just a royal seed, but the seed of a different future.